Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby talked about that Russian convoy stalled miles outside the city. I just want to play some of that for our viewers.
That convoy that we talked about also has been stalled and slowed. And quite frankly, a big reason for that has been the Ukrainian resistance. They were able to hit some of those lead vehicles and get it to stop.
What's the latest that you've been hearing and seeing?
Well, the Pentagon, Anderson, saying that that not only is it stalled, but that it hasn't really moved, obviously, in the past few days since the weekend. It's stuck about 15 miles outside of Kyiv. And on top of the efforts that the Ukrainians and special forces in particular have made against those vehicles, there was also a bridge that was blown up that has caused them to stop, that has prevented their advance. But there are a number of factors that have gone into the fact that this convoy is pretty much at a standstill. I mean, think about how many days that we've been talking about this, and it stretched way out. And initially it was 3 miles. Now it's stretched way out to 40 miles. And you've heard military experts and former officials talking about them being sitting ducks out there. And so we have seen these Ukrainian forces managing to pick off a number of those vehicles. Given the fact that they are so stretched out and that they are relatively far from supply lines, we also know that the Russians have had a hard time refueling and getting food. And so the Pentagon believes that they are reassessing, that it may be too soon to say that they aren't making much progress. You still have a formidable amount of firepower in terms of the troops, the armored vehicles, and the artillery that are in that convoy. And so there is a real concern that they will play a significant part of an encirclement of Kyiv, which the Ukrainians believe is still Moscow's main priority. They said that just today, that the top priority is still to encircle Kyiv and to break through the resistance. So not only do we have that convoy that is north of Kyiv, we also have Russian forces to the west that the Ukrainians claim have been pushed back. We have seen some success by the Ukrainians against the Russian forces there, and the Ukrainians believe that they are calling up more resources to replenish their troops and their weaponry there. And Anderson, that is a very important point, because we keep hearing about the successes of the Ukrainians against the Russians, but the fact of the matter is the Russians have a much deeper reserve of power than the Ukrainians do. That's why the Ukrainians have been calling on everybody, not just in the country, but from outside the country, to come help them fight. The Pentagon believes that some 92% of the pre-positioned combat power of the Russians is now in Ukraine, and that they still have the vast majority of that combat power still in reserve. So despite the fact that the Russians have not made much progress here in Kyiv, there is still so much they can do. And Anderson, the belief is that because they may be frustrated on the ground, because they are getting pushed back on the ground, that they may step it up from the air. So there is real concern, real fear that we may soon see more significant aerial bombardment, not just of Kyiv, but of other areas by Russia's helicopters and jets. Anderson.
Yeah. Fred, in Moscow, NATO, you've been watching Russian weapons and manpower pour into Ukraine now for this entire invasion. You're in Moscow now. U.S. officials saying they're using cluster bombs in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is saying everything is going according to plan. What's the latest that you've been seeing today?
Yeah. Look, and the NATO Secretary General obviously also saying today that NATO believes that the Russians have been using cluster bombs. The Russians have said nothing about that so far, but the statements that we're getting from the Russian military and also from the Russian government remain pretty unequivocal. They keep saying that they are not targeting civilians, not targeting civilian areas, and don't want civilians to come to harm. Now, what we've been hearing from the Russian military is they accused the Ukrainian military of essentially hiding weapons in civilian areas, and as the Russian government and the Russian military put it, using civilians as human shields in some of those areas as well. So that's the official line that we're getting from Russia. And as far as those munitions are concerned, obviously, Anderson, one of the things that we saw when we were down in Belgorod, right across from the front line in Kharkiv, was the Russians move a rocket launcher towards the front line that uses or that shoots a thermobaric tipped rockets, and that's certainly something that's been criticized by the United States. We can't obviously confirm whether or not the Russians actually used that rocket launcher, but we do know that it was moved towards the front line and is obviously stationed in that area, or was stationed in the area around the Kharkiv front line. At the same time, though, Anderson, as the Russians say that they are not causing any civilian casualties and that everything is going according to plan, as Vladimir Putin said, They are also cracking down on critical speech towards this operation. Today, there was a law that was passed by the Russian lower house of parliament and then the upper house of parliament as well, seemingly trying to fast track all of this, which essentially makes it illegal to say anything critical about the Russian military and this operation or anything that would sort of induce sanctions against Russia. And the penalties are pretty massive. It's up to 15 years in prison or around $13,000, which is a huge amount of money here in Russia. Vladimir Putin still has to sign that law, but it certainly is already something that's having a chilling effect on journalists here in this country. Of course, many of the critical media already have been shut down here in Russia. The BBC, for instance, today said it was ceasing operations in the Russian Federation. And just a couple of minutes before we went to air, Novaya Gazeta, of course, the managing editor of which just won the Nobel Peace Prize, is saying that it's taking down all of its content related to Russia's military operation simply because they're not sure whether their journalists are going to have to go to jail for a very long time if they keep reporting on it, Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, it's all obviously aimed at journalism and accurate coverage, because right now everything that's imposing sanctions on Russia are the statements of Vladimir Putin. So he's actually should be subject to that law. Alex Marquardt, Fred Plankton, appreciate it. Now back to Anna in New York.
And Anderson, this is a growing global crisis when you think of all the refugees that are now ending up in other countries. More than 1 million Ukrainians have fled the escalating hardships of war and are escaping to neighboring countries. CNN's Sarah Seidner is at one such crossing just inside Poland along the border with Ukraine. Sarah, what are you seeing today?
We're in Medica, Poland, and just over my left shoulder is the border with Ukraine. We are seeing families, some of whom just crossed by us as you were talking. I'm going to have Jerry just show you. They have finally gotten some transport to get out of the frigid cold. You can see that they are carrying very few things. Most people have just one bag or one backpack, lots of children. Some kids who are in 9 or 10 coming over the border. It's slow when it comes to the numbers, but as you're seeing, it's all day and all night long people coming through here. And now Poland has about half of the 1 million plus people who have made their way from the war in Ukraine into another country. Poland bearing the brunt of that because of its proximity and because Poland has opened its doors much wider, allowing people, for example, not just to drive, they can walk, and however they can get here, they will be allowed over the border. The EU and Poland assuring people, no matter what their residency is or what their passport says, they will be allowed to cross away and out of war. But we are seeing something very interesting, and that is we are seeing not only people streaming out of Ukraine, but we are seeing a few people going in. Listen.
We picked up a few guys and we were ready to join the fight. The little story, I was a sniper in Afghanistan twice, and I went against ISIS as well in 2015, so it's my second time as a volunteer. And we just met up at the airport. And we need to push a lot of people at the front very quickly.
So there were several men that we noticed walking towards the border and then going in. They were speaking French. There was someone who was French Canadian, and there were people who were from the UK, from England. All of them said that they were veterans of war and that they wanted to just go and fight. Fight for Ukraine, fight for, as they said, freedom, fight against Russia and against what they called fascism and communism. They said this is their duty, and that they are going in unpaid to try and help the Ukraine people. One by one, they said they had a plan and that they had someone meeting them on the other side in Ukraine. Anna?
It's all so interesting, so tragic. Sarah, stay with me for just a sec. I know we were having some issues with your signal, but I've been able to hear you loud and clear. I just want to ask you then, if there are some 500,000 people who are then crossing the border, are there in Poland right now, what happens to them after they cross? I mean, longer term, not just within 24 hours, but, you know, in the weeks to come, where are they going? What's going to happen to them?
That's the thing, and that's why you see so much panic on people's faces, so much sorrow on people's faces, because frankly, most of them have no idea. We met a family last night who literally had the clothes on their back. They had nothing. They had panicked. There were bombings very close to them. They had gone into a shelter and literally ran out of that country as fast as they could get here. And they got here eventually by train. And it was just a matter of trying to figure out who they could go to. They said they were going to a friend's house, the friend barely even knowing that they were going to show up the same night. There isn't a lot of planning that you can do. I mean, this has only been going on for a week and a few days, and so people don't know. Some of them have been stuck in a train station for a couple of days trying to figure out their lives. One thing, though, we are hearing is that there are lots of people here in Poland and around Europe, Germany, Denmark, who are telling people they are welcome. They can come and stay in their personal homes, and they'll give them transportation.